Over a year ago, I launched my campaign for President of the United States. 107 days, traveling the country, fighting for our future. The shortest presidential campaign in modern history. It was intense, high stakes, and deeply personal for me and for so many of you. In writing this book, one truth kept coming back to me. Sometimes, the fight takes a while.
Today, Kamala Harris announced the release of her new book about her 2024 campaign out in September. In just a couple of hours, she will sit down with Stephen Colbert on The Late Show. And just yesterday, she announced, after much speculation, that she is not running for governor of California next year. Sources close to Harris tell NBC News she wants to keep her options open for a possible third presidential bid in 2028. The question is, what will the field of Democratic candidates look like them, and what Democrats are looking for and will need to win in 2028? Alex Wagner is a senior political analyst for us here at MSNBC. Faz Shakir is a senior advisor for Senator Bernie Sanders, executive director of More Perfect Union, and they both join me now. Alex, at some level, it's not at all surprising that the former vice president, the person who ran the last time, and we should note, in numerical terms, got even more votes than Barack Obama, right? It was an enormous turnout election, would be like, I want to give it another run. What's your reaction to this development?
My take generally, Chris, I lost a little bit of the audio at the end, so I'm just going to go with what I think you said to me. But I think generally it's not surprising at all that Kamala Harris decided not to run. I mean, first of all, California is now the seat of this, one of the top targets on Trump's list in terms of, his war on quote unquote woke, his war on Democrats, his war on the opposition, his war on the resistance. And Kamala Harris would have to be saddling up for, more years of direct combat with the man. She literally just finished fighting in the 2024 election. I also think that as sort of watchers of all this, grossly underestimate the sort of personal exhaustion that these people who have been in public life feel, and to get back in at this incredibly disruptive, deeply fractured moment in American politics requires not just an interest in democracy, but a deep and abiding ability to combat, to combat I think not just Trump, but what feels like a cleave in American society, to try and stitch the country back together in some fashion. Because Kamala Harris wouldn't, of course, just be representing the state of California. She'd be representing, in many ways, the Democratic Party. And that is a heavy mantle to bear right now. And by the way, not one I'm sure that all the Democratic Party wants her to carry. So, I mean, I think there are a lot of reasons, most of them unsurprising, but it does lead to the obvious question of what does that mean for the center of gravity within the Democratic Party, and what are the implications for 2028?
One of the sort of dynamics here, which Brad Lander, New York City comptroller, who came in, third or second in the mayoral race, depending on how you count the instant runoff voting, said, is that it wasn't a sort of right or left distinction that he was thinking of in the party, but a fighter versus folder. Faz, people that want to fight and people that are kind of rolling over. And I'm thinking about that in terms of this Texas plan, right? Texas is going to do this extremely rare mid-decade redistricting to just basically take 5 seats away from Democrats. And now there's talk about Gavin Newsom saying he's floating a special session in November to not unilaterally disarm California can redistrict. How important are these dynamics as we head to 2028 of people showing they're willing to fight and stand up?
Yeah, well, if I was advising people who wanted to run for 2028, and I think the Democratic brand could use a bit of a refresh here, each presidential election is, Chris, guided by the attitude and the views of what came before. It's almost in some sense a reaction to what the last 4 or 8 years have been. And I think there are 3 major themes right now that I sense a lot of people around the country, including many Democrats, are looking for. One is the sense of integrity. So there's integrity and convictions issue. You're seeing a government being corrupted on a daily basis. Are you going to fight for people? Do you have an uncommon sense of integrity? The second one is around a populist agenda, a desire that you walk into a room with powerful economic forces, and it's not that you necessarily have to do battle with them, but that you are in charge, that you are willing to fight against them if needed, to fight for people. And the third around that is, I think, and it played out a little bit in the New York City mayoral, is the sense that, do you know the authorities that are vested within you and that you're willing to utilize them to do something? And I think this is where Trump is like going to change the nature of the presidency. Much of your show tonight has been talking about how he's changing norms and ethics of them. And so somebody's coming along in the wreckage and saying, here's how I want to reconstruct a presidency. And the person who's wrestling with the norms and the ethics and how to do it with power and integrity, I think, does well.
That's such a really good point. There's also, Alex, this issue. I mean, it's always hard to tell, right? Because it's so early and like, Lord knows what happened. Like, I think about like what people were thinking the 2020 election would be like in January of 2020. It's like, little did they know what it was going to be about that year. But that said, like, one of the things right now that I think isn't going away in the near term in the Democratic Party is this enormous fissure over American foreign policy specifically, and specifically Israel. Like, we saw this thing happen yesterday, a Bernie Sanders amendment to block arms sales, a majority of Democratic senators supporting it, which is the first time that's ever happened, almost sort of exactly a 50-50 cleavage. And obviously this was something that like Harris had to deal with in the campaign last year, people on the trail, people protesting the DNC. But being on what the right side of this, I think, may end up being incredibly important for how this plays out. What do you think?
Well, I think it's a placeholder for, one's ability and appetite to take, to both buck orthodoxy and to be brave. If we are framing this, and I think rightfully are, or I think accurately, in sort of a moral measurement, to be able to say, to sort of throw away sort of party lines or allegiances and say, this is what is morally right, this is what is ethically right. I mean, I think that there's this atrophy in and around the Democratic Party because there's the expectation that they'll always come back. They'll always do the sort of predictable thing. And sometimes I think that that's in the name of holding on to institutional integrity, whether that's nominating Merrick Garland for Antonin Scalia's Supreme Court seat or Chuck Schumer, dragging Democrats across the aisle to not shut down the government, right? That's in service of institutional integrity, but it hasn't won Democrats anything, right, in a lot of ways. Look at the sort of make of the balance of power. But then there's also this feeling that they'll just never stake out a position that's bold, that's different, that's authentic to, their sort of moral code. And I think this is one of those issues, Chris. I was at the convention. The lineup of speakers was very, obviously missing voices from, Gaza and the pro-Palestinian movement, which are a part of the Democratic Party base. But if you telescope that out to just be sort of balance of morality here, to ignore it entirely, I think, woe be to a candidate in the Democratic Party that does not feel like they can and should say something that is true to their own values on this issue.
Just
Faz,
briefly,
in the last
can
40
I add
seconds,
on to
your
it?
thoughts?
Real quick is that, a lot of it has been made of Biden and mental acuity and issues of inflation as the things that dogged the last election cycle. When you think of the Democratic brand and the struggles, there, I think, is a sense that big money plays too much of a role, of unwillingness to say what you really mean. Put your 2 feet on the ground and say it. Israel, the issue of Gaza, it kind of exemplifies the things that are hurting the Democratic brand, the desire that I think I know what you believe, I think I know your morality, but you won't say it. You won't be willing to stand up against AIPAC. And I think you're right that somebody who comes along with 2 feet on the ground is conviction and bold about this is what I believe and I'm willing to plant a flag on it does really well.
I agree. And I think that combined with some heterodoxy, like say it with your chest, and also sort of delineations is kind of a real sweet spot. Alex Wagner, Faz Shakir, thank you both.